So I got all the proper instructions from the principal and the superintendent, and we figured out a way to make this all work so that I could observe my son. And I got to the school early that day to speak with his music teacher, which is one of his bigger issues, that in PE. So that's where I went to. And the music teacher, she said that his biggest issue tends to be with instruments. He wants to play what he wants to play when he wants to play it, but she said after learning her expectations, he typically settles down. So the kids came in, and I've substituted there a lot, and I'm also a coach there at the school. And so the kids were excited to see me, my son included, but I redirected them to their teacher, who got their attention, had them sit in their squares, and this is a kindergarten class. So they did what they were supposed to. They've gotten used to doing what the teacher tells them. And I wasn't too big of a distraction. My son looked over at me a couple times, but just a little wave. And I noticed that he was following instructions. And when the class would get a little loud, or maybe she needed to get their attention after asking a question, she would just say, "Okay," count down from 5, and then continue on with the lesson, which seemed to keep them in order. So my son was actually asked to come in front of the class and see if they were staying in sequence with the music. And he seemed a little confused, being put on the spot, but he did a pretty good job. He pointed out a couple people that were out of sync, and then he went back to his square. What I noticed especially was that my son is behind. He took an extra 20 to 30 seconds to follow instructions. When the kids were asked to stand up, he still remained seated. When the students were asked to sit back down, he remained standing. And when he realized he was the only one, then eventually he would follow the order. But a couple times he needed to be asked personally to do it. I noticed these things at home as well. So then I talked to his PE teacher when he went from music to PE, and the PE teacher said the same thing about his triggers, that it typically was things and not people that triggered him. So maybe not playing the game that he wanted to, or not being able to perform what was asked of him. That day it was soccer instructions, and the teacher was teaching them how to dribble the ball. And he did pretty good at first. He looked intent on learning, but then he would just kick the ball and then go around and pick it up with his hands, which obviously in soccer, no hands. But anyway, my hypothesis for this is about selfishness, and it comes from Romans 2:8, 6:6, and then Proverbs 16:20. But for those who are self-seeking and who reject the truth to follow evil, there will be wrath and anger. For we know that our old self was crucified with Christ, so that the body ruled by sin might be done away with, that we should no longer be slaves to sin. And whoever gives heed to instruction prospers, and blessed is the one who trusts in the Lord. And so I realize that he's a little self-seeking right now and wants to do things his way. He's often the last one in line. He takes his time. He doesn't listen. And so I know that with good instruction, we crucify that flesh so that Christ can be glorified in him. I know that he'll begin to understand these things as he grows in maturity and in age. Solomon warned those against selfishness, and he said that isolating themselves would cause issues in their life, and he tends to go off on his own when he doesn't like what's going on. And so these are things that we have noticed and that we can begin to teach him as he gets older. And catching it soon will help him more and more. I've noticed with his IEP team that having that in place and being able to provide for his special education, he's grown a ton. And so my conclusions come from engagement. When Andre feels engaged, he does really well. When he's not engaged, he walks away and does his own thing. So I want to share these observations with his IEP team, and hopefully we can come up with a group decision when he's left alone with a class of 18 or 20. Then these things happen. He doesn't feel engaged, and then he drifts off and doesn't listen. But if he can have perhaps someone with him to keep him engaged, perhaps he will gain more from his learning experience. Thanks.